The Man Behind the Window. It started on an ordinary Tuesday night in late October. I was living alone in a small rented house on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where the streetlights barely worked and the neighbors were far enough away that you rarely saw them. The house was cheap, a little too cheap, and though I'd told myself I had gotten lucky with the rent, deep down I knew there was probably a reason nobody else wanted to live there. That evening, the air was heavy and cold, carrying with it the smell of wet leaves. I made myself some tea, sat on the couch, and scrolled through my phone while the television played quietly in the background. It was just another night, until I noticed something odd out of the corner of my eye. One of the living room curtains, the one closest to the front yard, seemed slightly parted. I was sure I had closed it completely earlier. Curious, I stood up and walked over. Through the narrow gap, I could see the dark outline of my front yard, the crooked wooden fence, and beyond that, the empty street. Nothing unusual. I shrugged it off, closed the curtain fully, and went back to the couch. 10 minutes later, I felt it again, that subtle sensation that someone is watching you. It crawled up my spine like ice water. I tried to ignore it, but something in me insisted I look back at the window. The curtain was parted again, this time wider. My throat went dry. I forced myself to move closer, my heart hammering in my chest. I peeked through the gap, and for a brief second I froze. There was a man standing by the fence. He was tall, unnaturally tall, and his face wasn't right. From that distance I couldn't see it clearly, but I knew instinctively that something about it was wrong, as though it didn't belong to him. I yanked the curtain shut and stepped back, trying to calm myself. "It's just a trick of the light," I whispered to myself, "just shadows." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. An hour passed. I tried distracting myself with a movie, but my mind kept drifting back to the window. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me into a restless sleep on the couch. I woke sometime after midnight to the sound of tapping, soft, repetitive, coming from the window. My heart nearly stopped. Slowly, I sat up, straining to listen. The tapping grew louder, like nails gently rapping against the glass. Gathering every ounce of courage, I reached for my phone, its screen casting a faint glow in the darkness. I unlocked it and turned on the flashlight. When the beam of light hit the window, I screamed. A face was pressed against the glass. Pale skin stretched tightly over bone, eyes wide and empty, mouth twisted into a grotesque grin that didn't move, even as the tapping continued. But the most horrifying part wasn't the face itself, it was the reflection. The face wasn't on the outside of the glass, it was on the inside. I stumbled backwards, dropping my phone. The room plunged into darkness. The tapping stopped. For a long moment, silence hung heavy, broken only by my ragged breathing. I fumbled for the light switch on the wall and flicked it on. The window was empty, curtains still drawn, nothing there. Shaking, I convinced myself it had been a nightmare brought on by too much caffeine and not enough sleep. Still, I couldn't bring myself to stay in the living room. I retreated to my bedroom, locked the door, and curled up under the blankets like a terrified child. At some point, I must have drifted off again, because the next thing I remember was waking up to faint whispers. They were so soft I thought I was imagining them, but the longer I listened, the clearer they became. They were coming from just beyond the bedroom door. "Let me in." My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. The whisper repeated, this time louder. "Let me in." I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to stay still, to not move an inch. The doorknob rattled gently like someone was testing it. Then came the sound of nails dragging slowly down the wood. I don't know how long I lay there, paralyzed, listening, hours maybe. Eventually, the sound stopped, replaced by silence so suffocating it was almost worse. When the sun finally rose, I forced myself to open the door. The hallway was empty, no scratches on the door, no sign that anything had been there at all. It would have been easy to believe it was all some fever dream, except for one thing. On the inside of my bedroom window, drawn into the condensation of the glass, were 3 words, written in shaky letters. I found you.
I'd been living alone for 6 months in a cabin at the end of a dirt road in rural New Hampshire. It was isolated, peaceful, just me, the creaking floors, and wildlife visitors like bears on the porch. I was okay with that kind of quiet, until one morning when something happened that still chills me to my bones. I stepped outside before dawn to head to work. The air was crisp, windows frosted from the cold, and only the distant caw of a crow cut through the silent morning. As I approached my truck, something stopped me cold. Across the frost on the rear window, someone had written 3 words, I watch you. The letters weren't just traced, they seemed written with intent, slowly, deliberately. The frost around each letter was pristine, untouched. I stared, heart hammering, as my breath beaded on the glass. My hand shook as I reached out. My fingertips brushed the cold surface, and the message seemed real and printed beneath the frost. Goosebumps rose like tiny alarm bells. How had anyone gotten this close without me knowing? No prints on the ground, no footprints in the frost, no signs of a prowler at all. I ran into the truck and locked the doors. Every noise in the world felt amplified. The humming engine mocked me with normality. I tried to drive away, but the gravel road crunched like knives under my tires. By the time I called my neighbor from the road, voice barely above a whisper, I was a mess. He pulled up and we went back to investigate. But by then, whoever had written it had gone. The frost had melted under the rising sun. No message, no trace. I was relieved, yet terrified. The mind can play tricks in the cold. But even now, months later, I don't think it was my imagination. Because a few nights ago, after another deer on the porch, I glanced up at my bedroom window and froze. Someone had written on the inside of the glass, I still watch. When I was 19, I rented a small, rundown apartment in a bad part of town. The rent was cheap, and the landlord barely asked questions. It was exactly what a broke college kid like me needed. The place was old, creaky, and smelled faintly of mildew, but it was mine. At first, I chalked up the noises at night to bad plumbing, maybe rats in the walls, scratching, shuffling, little bumps from the floorboards. It was an old building after all. But soon, I noticed the sounds weren't random. They were coordinated. They always came after midnight, always from my bedroom. The first time it really scared me was when I woke up at 3:14 a.m. exactly. My room was dark, but I heard the sound of breathing. Not mine. Deep, slow, deliberate breathing. I held my breath to make sure. It didn't stop. It was coming from under my bed. I wanted to believe it was in my head. I pulled the covers over me like a terrified kid, telling myself it was nothing. Eventually, I passed out from sheer exhaustion. The next morning, I checked. I forced myself onto the floor, heart racing, and looked under the bed. Nothing. Just dust and a missing sock. I felt stupid. But it happened again the next night. And the next. Always around 3 a.m. Always the same slow breathing. Sometimes it shifted, as if whatever it was changed position, stretching out beneath me. Once I swear I heard fingernails dragging against a wood floor. One night, I decided to test it. I whispered into the dark,
I can hear you. The breathing stopped instantly. That silence was worse than any noise I ever heard. I didn't sleep at all after that. I moved to the couch, but even there, the sounds followed. Soft scratching against the walls, as if whatever lived beneath the bed was angry I wasn't there anymore. A week later, I came home late from work. The apartment was dark, but my bedroom light was on. I never left it on. My stomach dropped. I walked in slowly, forcing myself not to bolt. The bed was pulled 6 inches away from the wall, and written on the wall in black marker, just above where the mattress used to rest, were the words, "I like watching you sleep." I moved out that night. I never went back for my things.